Falling asleep while listening to this story is normal. But if you wake up, never, ever look at the clock. I did, and from the moment I looked, nothing was ever the same again. My name is Elias Crow. I am a 38-year-old human being. Throughout my life, I have struggled with things that attract no one's attention. Lost documents, unfinished files, erased names. Everything people want to forget, everything, was my job. That's why I moved to that desolate town in the north. Its name is very hard to find on a map. On the internet, it is almost non-existent. The only sentence I read about it was this: "Those who go there forget why they went." At the time, I didn't take it seriously. When I arrived in the town, there was no sun in the sky, but it wasn't raining either. Still, everything smelled wet, soil, stone, old wood, as if something had been left without breath for a very long time. When I first saw the house, I stopped the car. I turned off the engine. I didn't open the door. I just looked. The house stood at the end of the road. It was 3 stories tall. It had narrow windows. It was covered in dark-colored stone. But what disturbed me was not any of that. What disturbed me was that the house didn't feel empty. There was no one inside, but it felt as if someone was there. I wanted to forget that thought. I was tired. I had come a long way. Dark places tend to meddle with the mind too much. At least, that's what I thought. I got the key from the town's only real estate office. It was in a small box behind the door. There was something written on the label: Crow, my last name. When I took the key in my hand, it was ice cold, but the air was not cold. When I opened the door, the first thing that caught my attention was the silence. But this was not an ordinary silence. This was a listening silence. I went inside. I took off my shoes. The wooden floor made a soft but sharp sound. And at that exact moment, the same sound came from upstairs. I stopped. The sound stopped too. I told myself, it's an old house. The wood must be shifting. But there was a problem. I had not yet taken a step upstairs. I began to explore the house. The living room, the kitchen, a small study. Everything was too orderly, as if someone had been waiting for me, and at the last moment had left. There was a cup on the table. It was empty, but at the bottom, dried coffee stains remained. I couldn't tell how long it had been there. The bedroom was on the 2nd floor. I opened the window. Not a sound came from the town. But this silence did not feel normal at all. No sound of a dog, no wind, no distant car. The world felt as if it had stopped. I lay down on the bed. I looked at my watch. 2:58. I thought I'd rest a bit, just close my eyes. When I woke up, the room was dark. My eyes were open, but I couldn't move. From inside the house, slow, familiar footsteps were coming. I wanted to look at the clock. My hand didn't move. My eyes shifted to the clock beside the bed. 03:17. And at that moment, the footsteps stopped, right beside my bed. I couldn't move. My eyes were open. I could breathe, but my body felt like it didn't belong to me. The light from the clock dimly illuminated the room. 03:17. footsteps were right by my bed. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there because they were breathing, slowly, deeply, in sync with my own breath. I wanted to scream from inside, but no sound came out. I tried to close my eyes. It didn't work. I could only stare at the ceiling. And then, the floor creaked slightly. Someone shifted their weight. Then I heard a voice. It wasn't a whisper, not speech either. It was more like a thought, but it wasn't mine. "You're late." My heart felt like it would burst from my chest, but my body still wouldn't move. That voice was right by my bedside, but I couldn't hear it with my ears. It was inside my head. "You should have come here earlier." A shadow appeared at the corner of my eye. I forced myself not to look, but my eyes moved toward it involuntarily. A silhouette, human-like, but not entirely human. Its height was normal, but its posture was wrong, as if its joints were connected in the wrong places. The silhouette bent down. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel it looking at me. "Elias Crow." It said my name. The voice didn't mispronounce it. It knew me. "The files are still incomplete." At that moment, my body was free. I gasped. Sweat drenched me. The silhouette was gone. The room was empty. The light from the clock blinded me all at once. 3:18. I jumped out of bed, turned on the light. Everything was normal. Too normal. The door was closed, the window locked, the room was empty. By morning, I told myself it had been sleep paralysis. People experience such things. The brain played tricks while half awake. But someone had said my name and spoken about the files. The first day I went to the archive, the building was almost empty. The corridors were long and narrow. There were no clocks on the walls. No one was looking at the time. On my desk, there was a single file. No label on it, only a number, 017. I opened the file. The first page was blank. The second page, too. On the third, there was only one sentence. "This file concerns the person reading it." I swallowed hard. I turned the page and saw my own name, Elias Crow, my date of birth, and at the bottom, a date that had not yet come. A single note was written beneath it. It begins at 3:17. When the footsteps stopped, I was able to take a deep breath. But this relief didn't last long. I moved my eyes away from the side of the bed. The room was still dark, but it had changed. It felt as if the room had shrunk a little. Something caught my attention. The air was heavy. I could barely breathe. It was as if an invisible presence in the room was measuring every move I made. I made a promise to myself. The next morning, I would go to the archive. I would review the files again. Everything had to make sense. But logic was absent there. When morning came, I opened my eyes. The sun wasn't there. The clouds were constantly gray. There was still no sound from the town. The first thing I did was go to the archive. There were almost no people in the building. The corridors were long and narrow, and there were no clocks on the walls. No one was looking at the time. No one was talking. It was as if time had stopped here. On my desk, there was a single file left. It had no label, only a number, 017. I opened the file. The first pages were blank. On the third page, there was a sentence. This file is about the person reading it. I swallowed hard. I turned the page, and I saw my name. Elias Crow, my date of birth, and at the bottom, a date that hadn't happened yet. There was a single note underneath. It begins at 3:17. At that moment, I realized my clocks were not a coincidence. The house, the sounds, the silence, and the file were all connected. That day, while working in the archive, I saw movement at the end of the corridor. I noticed it out of the corner of my eye, but there was no one there. Just a long shadow sliding along the wall. The shadow stopped. Then it disappeared around the corner of the corridor. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the emptiness of the corridor, but the sound did not accompany me. That evening, when I returned home, I felt a shiver as I opened the door. I dropped the key and closed the door quickly. But inside, nothing had changed. I went to the bedroom. I looked at my clock. 3:17. The footsteps did not start, but I still felt someone standing beside me, watching me, and I didn't know what to do. The next morning, darkness was still standing in the same place. I opened the window. Gray clouds were still covering the town. There was no sound. Absolutely no sound. Before heading to the archive, I ran into an elderly neighbor. His eyes were hiding something deep inside, but he wasn't looking at me. It was as if he was looking somewhere else. "Good morning," I said. My voice vanished into the emptiness. The man slowly turned his head. "Time doesn't keep here," he said. It was as if he expected me to understand his words, but I just nodded. "Sometimes you're late," he said, "and it feels like it never even started." I wanted to ask questions, but no words came from my lips. The man slowly walked away. He disappeared around the corner of the hallway. When I reached the archive building, the corridor seemed longer this time. Shadowy movements were still there, but this time they were more distinct. File 017 left on my desk was there again today. The same blank pages and the same sentence. This file concerns the person who reads it. I turned the page. Inside was my own name, Elias Crow, and the time, 03:17. Suddenly, I realized the file was being written. Every night, something was added, and that something came before me. That day, while working in the archive, I heard a sound, a rasp at the end of the corridor. I looked with my eyes. I saw no one. But I was looking at something that was watching me. I checked my watch, 3:16. When I left the archive, the building remained silent, but the sound of my steps was different than usual. It was as if my own sound had separated from me. When I returned home, the same routine started again. When I entered the bedroom and it reached 3:17, the footsteps didn't start, but the presence was still there. That night, for the first time, I gathered my courage. "Who's there?" I whispered. No answer came. I could only hear my breath, but the breath wasn't my own. That night, when I lay in bed, I waited for 3:17. When the clock struck exactly, the footsteps started again. But this time, they were closer, sharper, and different. I slowly looked toward the edge of the bed. The silhouette was still there, but for the first time, I could see it more clearly. It was the height of a human, but its posture was strange. Its joints twisted in unnatural ways, and its movements had an unreal rhythm. It turned its head. Its face was still hidden, but I could see that it was looking at me, and it whispered, "Elias Crow." It said my name correctly. It knew me. It had been watching me, and it knew about the file. File 017 is not complete yet. My heart raced, but I still couldn't move. I could only watch. The silhouette slowly retreated and disappeared from the room, but its breath was still beside me. At that moment, I realized 317 wasn't just a time, it was the beginning. File 017 writes something every night, but what's written only appears when I wake up. From that day on, the same routine began every night. Footsteps, the silhouette, and that whisper. By morning, I felt tired but awake, but the file was still on my desk. A new page had been added, with a date that looked as if it hadn't slept yet, 0317. From that moment on, everything became darker and more unknown. The house was no longer just a house. The archive was no longer just an archive. And I had become a victim waiting for 317 every night. That night was different. Before 317 arrived, I felt a heaviness in the air. I couldn't breathe again. My heart felt like it was about to jump out of my chest. But this time, the sounds were coming from closer. They were clearer. I looked again at the edge of the bed. There was a silhouette. But this time, it was moving, as if it was walking around the room, and it was looking at me. It slowly turned its head and whispered, "File 017, incomplete." The words hung in the air, but I understood their meaning. The missing thing was me, and the file was being written every night, but it was waiting for me to be completed. I gathered my courage. I wanted to answer it with my voice. "Who are you?" I said, but no sound came out. I could only look with my eyes, and the silhouette came closer. I felt its footsteps. The bed trembled. The air had turned ice cold. The silhouette's breath sent a shiver down my neck. At that moment, I realized the silhouette was not just a shadow. It was the thing that wrote the file, watched, and guided. It reached out its hands, but they weren't there, as if it wasn't touching me. Yet I felt its presence throughout my entire body. Suddenly, a light flashed in the room. The file was open on the desk. A new page appeared. The only sentence written on it, "Today is your day of choice." My heart felt like it was going to stop. What choice? And who was deciding? The silhouette pulled back, but I could still feel its breath. At that moment, I understood. This house, this town, and the file wanted me to do something. I made a promise to myself. I would no longer wait. I would investigate. I would solve all of File 017. But deep inside, I knew this solution would require a price. I looked at my watch, 0318. The silhouette was still there, but it had vanished from sight. I took a step, and I realized the ground was shaking, as if the house was alive and watching me. That night, I lay down on the bed, but I couldn't sleep, because now I knew. File 017 was not just a file. It was my destiny. And I had become part of the game that began at 317. I got ready to go to the archive that morning, but my steps were slow. It was as if the house itself was sticking to me, and there was a feeling inside me. Today, everything would change. File 017 was sitting on the desk. A new page had opened. On it was a sentence: "Watch, listen, decide." My heart raced. I was waiting for the silhouette, but it didn't appear. I reached for the file, and for the first time, I felt my finger on the pages. The pages trembled lightly, and I heard a whisper. It seemed to come from my own mind, but I wasn't sure. "Today is your day to choose," the voice said. I lifted my head. The silhouette appeared behind the desk, but this time it was different. It approached, and its presence filled the entire room. My eyes locked onto it. The silhouette looked at me, but it had no eyes, only emptiness. Yet inside me, I felt warmth and cold at the same time. I looked at the file. There were names on the page, my name, and a few familiar ones too. But the dates were like they belonged to the future, events that hadn't happened yet. The silhouette stepped closer and whispered, "If you don't make your choice, the one chosen will be you." At that moment, everything stopped. Only my breathing could be heard. My heart was pounding as if it would burst out of my chest, and I realized 0317 was not just the beginning. This was the warning of the beginning. The silhouette vanished, but its breath was still on the back of my neck. I took the file from the desk. The pages turned on their own. New sentences were being written, and all of them were watching me. That day, I understood. I was no longer a passive observer. File 017 was calling me, and I had to make a choice. That night, when I returned home, the air was heavier. It was as if the house recognized me and had been waiting. File 017 was sitting on the table. A new page had been opened. There was a sentence written on it: "Make your choice, or a choice will be made for you." My heart nearly stopped. I waited for 317, and then the footsteps began. But this time, they were different, faster, more determined. A silhouette appeared in the room, but this time it didn't stop. It was walking toward me. With every step, I could feel it beneath the floor. Yet the room still appeared empty. "File 017 must be completed," it said. My voice trembled, but I tried to respond. "I will complete it," I whispered. The silhouette stopped and took a step back, but its breath was still brushing against mine. I reached for the file. The pages turned by themselves. New sentences were being written. "Today, your fate is decided," it read. At that moment, I realized the silhouette was part of the file and the house. It could not be stopped. But there was a choice. I could continue reading the file and learn the rules. My fingers trembling, I turned the pages, and on the pages I saw my own future. The silhouette looked at me and slowed its steps, but it did not disappear. And then I understood. This was not just a game. This was a test that would change my life. 317 had passed, but the real test was just beginning. That night, when I lay in bed, I waited for 317. But this time, it was different. I was no longer passive. I was ready. Footsteps began, but this time I didn't wait. I reached for the file. The pages turned on their own. A silhouette appeared, but when it came closer, I was whispering my own name. Today is your day of choice. But this time, I answered. I will no longer wait, I said. The silhouette stopped and took a step back. I flipped the pages quickly. Each sentence was more terrifying. But now, I was beginning to understand. File 017 wasn't just watching, it was guiding. The silhouette moved around the room, sometimes visible, sometimes gone, but its breath was still on me. And then I realized, File 017 was shaped by my decisions. I knew now. 0317 was only the beginning, and the silhouette was the guardian of my fate. My heart raced, but this time not from fear, from excitement and curiosity. When it was 3:17, I was no longer afraid. There were no footsteps, but there was a presence in the room, a silhouette standing right in front of me. Elias Crow, it said. The voice was both echoing and inside my head. File 017 must be completed, and you must make a choice. I reached for the file. The pages turned on their own, and for the first time, there was a blank space on the pages, empty, yet calling. The silhouette took a step. It came closer. I could now see its face, but it was not human. Its joints were strange, its posture twisted, but its eyes could see the fear inside me. My breathing quickened, but I made a decision. I touched the page, and I began to write. I choose, I said. The silhouette stopped. Silence filled the room, but its breath was still beside me. The pages turned on their own, and the last sentence, "The first step has been taken. Now, the game begins." My heart was racing, but there was also a sense of clarity. I was no longer passive. I was no longer a spectator. File 017 and this house were now my game. The silhouette vanished, but its breath was still beside me. And I knew, every night at 3:17, it would bring a new trial. I closed the door, but an unease lingered inside me, because one thing was clear. This was only the beginning, and I could no longer go back.